So, when did you decide to leave Stanford?
Well, I left Stanford when I got the job at Iowa State.
Mm-hmm.
And
what job did you get there?
I was teaching international relations. I was an instructor.
Mm-hmm.
And I was hired pending, you know, as soon as I finished my dissertation, I would be promoted to assistant professor. So I went, and the students there were interested and interesting. I wasn't expecting how really intelligent they were or sophisticated, but they didn't have any center. They didn't have anybody who knew much about Vietnam or knew much about Asia really right then. And so so they came, a lot of them from the local, you know, Eddie Wargo came to me and asked, you know, about if I could talk about Vietnam. And by that time, you know, I knew history, I knew what was going on, I knew some people that were in the war, I knew some people who had come back from the war, and I knew what it was like to be in the army.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
And when I was in Taiwan, as the ambassador's assistant, I read a lot of the telegrams, you know, the traffic, we called it, you know, but the messages from Saigon to Washington, they sent information copies. So I knew what was going on somewhat inside the embassy in Saigon, and I knew it was terrible. So I could tell students, you know, that was a lot of more truth than they were getting from other sources, and give them some basis for opposition that was really based on fact. And so we organized a group and began holding, you know, demonstrations at Iowa State and really organizing it a little bit. Well, yeah, it just didn't make me very popular on the faculty.
How so? Or
Well,
why?
Because a faculty works according to certain rules and certain customs that are, you know, we have 1,000 years of academic life, starting with the universities in Oxford and, you know, in Prague and Paris and Perugia and so forth. And there's customs built up of how you teach and how you learn, how do you interact with students and things, and you break some of those rules, some of those unwritten rules, and some there are. So anyway, we began meeting every Sunday, you know, maybe 50 students and me, and I was the faculty advisor then to the anti-war party, and we actually took over the student council at Iowa State University, and were able to use student money for, they had an annual festival, anyway, it was a kind of a week of study of a given subject, you know, so we got them to do a week on the Vietnam War in about 1973, I guess it was, and brought in people from the New York Times and people, you know, like who had been prisoners of war in Hanoi, and people who had been from government, you know, people I knew from the diplomatic corps, and had a lecture, maybe 2 or 3 lectures every day that people could come to for free, and so we got, you know, we got some real information about what was going on, and that strengthened the movement. And it was really, you know, I was having a lot of fun. Of course, I had too much fun, really. But when people thought they might want to join us, but they weren't sure, but maybe, you know, sometimes the Reserve Officers Training Corps, the ROTC, would hold meetings to supposedly recruit people there, and they would bring in graduates who had been to Vietnam and come home, and like we went to one the Air Force ROTC was holding, and these guys came in and they'd been pilots in Vietnam, and they were describing how they would bomb villages and how scared they would be. And we would all be sitting there, wait a minute, they don't even think about the people down below. They say, no, the people down below are shooting at us. Well, what do you think? You know? And we wouldn't have to say a word. We'd just walk out, you know, and the people who were with us would go, okay, we'll join. we let them recruit our best people, you know, because they hadn't realized how bad it was until they heard it from people who had been there and who thought they were doing good. But we also knew, I mean, when I was at Stanford, the most radical students, there's a story around that when American soldiers came back from the war in Vietnam, they were spit on and reviled, In fact, we would go to the airport or the ships and meet the troops and bring them back and give them sympathy because we knew they'd been through hell. They had experienced the same feeling. That we're in the wrong place. I have to kill people, otherwise I get killed. And this is all terribly wrong, and I still have to do it. So we knew what they'd been through and the terrible shock. So I knew, I was like coming into